Today, we're diving into this really fascinating, kind of in-between period in literary history. We're going to see how two totally different poets managed to build a bridge that would honestly change the very soul of poetry forever. So, how does a revolution actually begin? You know, with a huge protest? A big declaration? A battle? Yeah, a lot of the time, sure. But one of the biggest revolutions in all of literature, well, it didn't start with a bang.
It started quietly, with a new feeling, a completely different way of seeing the world, all captured on a single page. This whole literary revolution kicked off with a poem. And that's the story we're getting into right now.
We're jumping back to the late 18th century, an era that was, for all intents and purposes, a bridge in time for poetry. It was the crucial link connecting two completely different worlds, two opposing ideas about what a poem should even be.
Okay, so on one side of the chasm, you have the Augustan Age. This was poetry that was super polished, logical, and written for the upper crust. It was all about reason and order. Then, way over on the other side, you have the coming Romantic Age, which was its total opposite: wild, emotional, inspired by nature, and speaking for the average person. So the big question is, how do you get from one to the other? You get there with something called transitional poetry. And this isn't some lesser form, no way. It is the crucial link. These poets were literally standing with one foot in the old world of classical rules and the other in the new world of personal feeling. They were the experimenters, the ones bold enough to blend the old with the new to create the future. So, how do they pull it off? What were the rules for building this amazing literary bridge? Well, these poets basically wrote a whole new playbook, a new recipe for what poetry could actually do. Let's break it down. This new recipe had 5 key ingredients. First, they started valuing personal feelings way more than pure logic. Second, nature stopped being just a pretty backdrop and became a real character, a source of wisdom. Third, their focus shifted away from kings and queens to the simple, rural lives of ordinary people. Fourth, they leaned into themes of sadness and quiet reflection. And finally, they started writing in a more natural, almost conversational language. You have to understand, for the time, this was absolutely revolutionary stuff. All right, let's look at our first bridge builder, Thomas Gray. You can think of him as the scholar or the architect. This was a deeply educated guy who knew all the classical rules inside and out, but he used them to build something completely new. And his masterpiece is the Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. Seriously, if you want to understand this entire movement in just one piece of writing, this is it. The poem just perfectly captures that feeling of being caught between two worlds. The poem really has a dual identity. On one hand, you can totally see its classical side. You've got formal language, structured verse, and moral lessons, just like the Augustan poets loved. But then you see the future. The tone is so deeply personal and reflective, it's filled with the beauty of nature, and most importantly, it shows this incredible empathy for the forgotten villagers buried in the churchyard. It's a perfect hybrid. Now let's move on to our second architect, who came from a completely different world. This is Robert Burns, the ploughman poet. He wasn't some Cambridge scholar. He was a farmer from rural Scotland, and he brought the authentic voice of the people right into the heart of poetry. To really get Burns, you have to get his world. He was living in an age of revolution. The ideas of liberty and equality coming out of America and France totally fired up his imagination. He championed the dignity of the common person. He fought to preserve his native Scots language, and he wrote about real, raw, everyday feelings: love, sorrow, friendship, you name it. One of his most famous poems, To a Mouse, actually came from a simple accident. He was plowing a field and destroyed a mouse's nest. But to explore this tiny tragedy, he uses a technique that would become a huge deal in the Romantic era. And that technique is called anthropomorphism. It's basically when a writer gives human feelings and thoughts to something that isn't human. So Burns doesn't just see an animal, he sees a fellow mortal, a creature with its own life, its own fears. I mean, just listen to how he talks to the mouse. "Wee, sleekit, cowern, timorous beastie." In just those few words, he paints this vivid picture of a small, sleek, cowering, fearful little creature. He's speaking right to it with so much tenderness and respect. There's no cold, classical distance here. This is just pure, heartfelt emotion. And by the end, you realize the poem isn't just about a mouse. That mouse becomes a symbol for anyone who is powerless, the poor, the oppressed, whose lives get turned upside down by the careless and the powerful. Burns takes a simple farm incident and turns it into this profound statement on social justice.
So let's step back for a second and just look at this incredible bridge that these two poets built. You've got Gray the scholar and Burns the plowman, from two completely different worlds, and yet they work together to lay the foundation for a whole new era of literature.
So here's the final blueprint of what they left behind. Together, these transitional poets connected the cold, logical world of reason to the warm, vibrant world of emotion. Gray brought this deep, reflective sadness, but wrapped it in an elegant, classical style. Burns brought raw emotional honesty and a powerful voice for the common person. Their combined legacy was proving that poetry didn't have to choose. It could be both intellectual and deeply human.
Ultimately, Thomas Gray and Robert Burns did so much more than just write good poems. They changed the rules of the game. They showed the next generation of romantic poets, guys like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Keats, what was even possible. They truly paved the way for a whole new world. And that really just leaves us with one final thought. Every era has its own transitional figures, right? People who stand between the old and the new. So the question for us is, who are they today? What in-between voices in art, or science, or culture are building the bridges that are going to define our future?